Well, good evening, Brian, and welcome to the Lodge Hope of Karachi, number 337, and our weekly lockdown lecture, Zoom lecture series. This is meeting number 32, Brian, and it's a great pleasure to have our members and our visitors with us. As usual, can I remind you all of the Grand Lodge of Scotland guidelines for Zoom meetings, and can I ask you to have your video camera on and a name within the screen so we know who you are. Can I ask you to sign the virtual tile on our Facebook pages, just so we have a record for posterity and the history of the Lodge going forward? Thank you very much in advance, Brian. As usual, can anyone who's got any questions this evening, can you please put them in the chat, and we will have a moderated questions and answer session afterwards with our speaker. I would encourage you to partake in the conversation afterwards within the Facebook pages. And if you have to leave or go early, this is being recorded, Brent, and it will be available on the Lodge Hope of Karachi YouTube channel later on this evening. Well, Brian, it's a great pleasure to welcome another speaker along this evening. He will be known to many of you. He's been a regular attender at these lockdown lecture series, and it is brother Grant Macleod. He's a past master at Houston St Johnston, number 242 through in the west. He's a past master of our sister research lodge, the Anchor Lodge of Research. And he's a past provincial Grand Secretary of Renfrewshire East, probably one of the most hard-working Brian in the province, the provincial Grand Secretaries. But particularly for our research and learning, he also has some extracurricular activities that he gets up to, and he's been the editor of the Cross Keys magazine that has been published for many years. And Brian, if you've not seen that, please Google that. I'm sure Grant will share more information with us this evening. And he's about to become the co-editor of the Ashland magazine, the independent Scottish Masonic magazine, and we wish him all the very best with that in the future. So without much further ado, it gives me the greatest pleasure to hand over to Brother Grant Macleod, who's going to tell us about the life and times of Brother Lord Kitchener.
Thanks, Gordon. Can I just say that if I disappear, I'll come back on right away. My bandwidth has been coming up, has been slow. I'm changing over to BT. I actually just changed this morning, so it's going to be a couple of weeks. So if I do suddenly disappear, I'll come back in. So please don't just run away unless I have actually finished. I'll just share the screen.
Yeah, you can.
Okay, can everybody see that?
No, it's not come up yet, Grant.
Okay, is that okay for everybody?
Not yet.
Yeah. Can everybody hear me okay? I'm down for some reason. Just
You're quite
okay.
Star Wars sounding.
What I'll do, I'll maybe go and chase my daughter because she's on to Sandhurst just now.
One of the challenges, Brian, of modern technology. And I suppose Brother Macleod lives in one of those extra special lockdown areas where no one can actually get out to the pub, so the bandwidth will be getting chewed up through on the West Coast.
Good evening, Gordon. Joseph
Hi,
here.
Joseph. Welcome.
Thank you.
Right, here we come. That's it coming up now, Grant.
Okay. Can you hear me okay? Is that fine?
I can hear you better now, Grant. It's saying that you've started sharing screen, but it's still a blank screen. As ever, Brian, please just bear with us when we try to resolve these technical challenges that we're facing with Grant's bandwidth. It is a great delight to see 76 Brian here this evening. Just as we're waiting then, Brian, next week we have invited Brother Dr. Reuther, who is an English Freemason, and he's going to come along and give us a story about Freemasonry and the American Civil War. We had a little bit of that when Brother Moses Gomez joined us and talked about the Underground Railroad. So it'll be really interesting to hear both sides of the story from the Confederate and the Union side. That's Grant just coming back in. The following week, I'm just waiting for confirmation of our guest speaker, but then we have a variety of speakers right up until the 15th of December, Brian. And on the 15th of December, I propose that we then take our Christmas break, because I'm not too sure that your wives and partners, etc., will be too enamoured that you come along to a Lodge Hope or Karachi Zoom meeting 2 nights before Christmas, albeit that you guys may prefer that if we're still in some sort of lockdown, and then we'll come back in the new year and continue until we hope that we'll have some light and we can get back to some sort of normality and out and about. But no doubt our heads of orders will give us that information in due course. Grant, are you with us again? Grant, are you back with us? Well, Brian, I might have tempted fate when I said that I spoke to Grant this afternoon. You might not have to hear from me. If it's okay with you, we'll give him another 3 or 4 minutes to try and resolve his bandwidth. But if not, we might have to revert to the backup presentation. Okay. Brian, Brother Grant Macleod.
Right, brethren, finally, hopefully we'll get through this. Now, what I was going to look at with Lord Kitchener was his Masonic activities in conjunction with his military roles. And as you can see, he's got a whole host of honours attached to his name, far too many to really go through. So I thought we'd start with a picture where, I think this moved on now, a typical picture of Lord Kitchener taking a salute, and here he is on horseback in some far off exotic land. Now, the exotic land here turns out to be Pakistan, which perhaps today is not as exotic as it used to be. However, there is a lot more to this soldier and to this Mason than just the fancy uniforms that many people probably put with Kitchener himself. Horatio Herbert Kitchener was born in 1850 in County Kerry, which is way down south in Ireland. And obviously this was an area where the British Army served at that time. His father was a career soldier, and obviously at an early age that Kitchener was going to follow in his father's footsteps. He visited his father during the Franco-Prussian War as an ambulance man, probably very similar to Churchill, who had visited the war scenario, not as a soldier first of all, but as a war correspondent. This was the only action that Kitchener was able to see, since Britain at this time in the Franco-Prussian War was neutral. He therefore joined the French army in 1870. A year later, he joined the Royal Engineers and was involved in surveying the Holy Land, work which should really not be underestimated, because the grid system which he really started, and the data is still used by architects to this day. In 1882, he was posted to Egypt, and like many officers, his job was to train the natives and build a rail network. And who would think that 100 years later or so, this strategy of arming and training locals would come back to haunt us. In 1883, Kitchener was initiated in La Concordia Lodge in Cairo, aged 33. And although this is not 100% certain, because there's a handwritten note in the Grand Lodge records in London which states that he may have been initiated into Star in the East Lodge in the same year. Unfortunately, both were erased in 1890, and no records remain of this period of either lodge. This was actually an uneasy period for Britain. There was a great deal of unrest in the Sudan, which culminated in the fall of Khartoum in 1885. The same year they affiliated to Bulwer Lodge, and the standard is shown in the right-hand side there, which was the most senior lodge in Egypt at that time. By 1895, Britain was fed up with the rebels, and Kitchener was tasked with squashing them. This, however, took a further 3 years. During this time, Kitchener became even more active in the craft, and perhaps this was seen as an escape really from the turmoils of living abroad and being at war with a great many countries that Britain had. And like most of the brethren today, we go to the lodge and we get away from our daily routines and work and can have a fairly stress-free situation. However, in 1885, he was one of 13 founders, which seems strange considering Drury Lane Lodge was in London. And it appears that he was the founder of this lodge and never actually attended it. Now, why would that be? Well, perhaps the lodge wanted some dignitaries to get it started in order to raise their image. Some of the other founder members included an admiral, the Solicitor General for London, an earl, and was also later to see the initiation of Robert Scott on his way down to the South Atlantic. In 1892 was his first venture into a Royal Arts chapter, and was also given Commander-in-Chief of the Egyptian Army. In 1895, he was the founding master of Fataya Lodge, which operated under the National Grand Lodge of Egypt, and was awarded the rank of past Senior District Grand Warden under the National Grand Lodge of Egypt. The following year, honours really do begin to flow. It took him a year to become the first principal, so obviously he didn't go through all the offices. So he was first principal, and also awarded the rank of third Grand Principal, again under the National Grand Lodge of Egypt. In 1897, he became an honorary past Junior Grand Warden of the United Grand Lodge of England, and at the same time a past Grand Scribe of the Grand Chapter of England. I'm not sure if that was because the craft in the Royal Arts ranks, as they do today, seem to work in parallel. It might just be that the Grand Chapter wanted him as well. In 1898, he became an honorary member of Edinburgh Mary's Chapel No. 1, and also Canongate Kilwinning number 2. And at this point as well, he takes his first steps into mark masonry. And again, it may seem rather strange for us Scots that he joined the Royal Arch and then the mark, but remember, in England, the mark degree is a completely separate order and is not attached to Royal Arch chapters at all. And he became the junior warden for the Grand Lodge of Mark Masters, or Mark Master Masons in North Africa. Also at this time, Britain recaptured the Sudan after the Battle of Omdurman to avenge the death of General Gordon. And at this point, Kitchener was given a peerage. He was given the title of Baron. This was a huge success. 11,000 of the Mahdi's had been killed, as opposed to only 48 losses of the British Army and the Egyptian Army. At this point, he now acquired the title of Kitchener of Khartoum, for which he is very well known, and was also the Governor-General of Sudan. However, he didn't look at this with a hard hand. He ordered mosques to be rebuilt, and Friday was to continue as a holy day. He also prevented the missionaries from converting the Muslims into Christians. And at the same time, he managed to build 700 miles of railway. So he was still very much a case of the hearts and minds of the local population, which is how he always viewed success in the long term. In 1899, he was appointed Governor-General of the Sudan and installed as the District Grand Master. And the jewel, as shown, was the jewel that was struck to commemorate that particular event. The District Grand Lodge of Sudan at that point contained 4 lodges. At the end of the year, he was made Chief of Staff with the rank of Major General, along with brother Lord Roberts, who was made Commander-in-Chief of the British Forces. In 1900, he was promoted to Lieutenant General and became Commander-in-Chief during the Second Boer War. And unsurprisingly, he attended a lodge meeting in Bloemfontein just after the British occupation, along with brother Lord Roberts. The first meeting he was due to attend, for some reason, something had come up, very possibly on a military context, but so much so that this was actually reported in the local paper, which stated that the communication was received from Right Worshipful Brother Lord Kitchener, expressing his regret at not being able to attend the meeting, intimating that it was his intention to visit the lodge in the near future. This they managed in the following week, when both he and brother Roberts signed a loyal resolution to be sent to the Prince of Wales concerning Queen Victoria's health. This lodge continues to meet in Bloemfontein. In 1902, he was posted to India once again. He became Commander-in-Chief for India and promoted to the rank of Field Marshal. He immediately joined Khartoum Lodge, again operating under the English Constitution, and became the District Grand Master of the Punjab in India. This was a title, this was a role. It was not because of who he was, but because the particular District Grand Lodge was looking for leadership, and who better than Lord Kitchener. The same year, he also attended British Union Lodge in Ipswich and became an honorary member, as well as being given the freedom of the borough. Also present at that meeting was Sir Charles Dalrymple, past Grand Master Mason of Scotland. In 1903, he was once again posted to India and immediately joined Himalayan Lodge. And the same year, just a wee bit later on, he became the founder of Kitchener Lodge, of which 3 or 4 lodges took his name. And again, this was another English Constitution Lodge, and the jewel is shown. His aide-de-camp, at that time, Captain Gerald Fitzgerald, is shown, was initiated in 1906 and went through his degrees the following year, which Kitchener had attended. Both his ADC and Lord Kitchener affiliated to a number of lodges at the same time. So much so that his aide-de-camp, or really his personal military secretary, were great friends and tend to do everything together. So much so that he actually saved Kitchener's life in 1912 in a plot to assassinate him in Cairo. This event is actually well recorded,
and it would appear that Captain Fitzgerald put his body in front of Lord Kitchener's, which stumbled the assassin enough to be disarmed at that time. And there's a lot of aide-de-camps I know that would certainly not do that these days. So I'd like to think that perhaps it was the Masonic vows that Brother Fitzgerald had taken, that he felt it was his duty to protect Lord Kitchener. This particular photo was taken from an old London paper called The Sphere, and again another very distinguished photograph of Lord Kitchener. And this was going through, this article gave a complete army reform, and some of the things were reorganising the army of native soldiers into general service units, I suppose similar to the Scottish Division today. But what it did do was allow Sikh regiments to work in the south, and also the Madras regiment to work in the Punjab, which had never happened before. He also established a staff college, and the system of promotion within staff college is still in use today. So a great many of the things that Lord Kitchener did had lasting effects. They weren't just whims, really. Probably one of the most famous initiations attached with Kitchener was the Amir of Afghanistan. Lord Kitchener was his proposer, and he assisted at the initiation, the passing and the raising of the Amir in Lodge Concordia in Kolkata. All 3 degrees had to take place in the same night, and this was the first time any Afghani ruler had ever left the country. He was so taken by Freemasonry that the Amir had all the rituals translated into Afghani so that he could then study them at a later point. Because his knowledge of the Masonic affiliation could be used against him by his enemies in Afghanistan, the Amir's membership had to be kept secret from his staff, his soldiers, basically his entire entourage, and also the public. However, the Amir was so proud of being a Freemason that he eventually publicly announced it, and that he had joined and told his people that he had joined Freemasonry in order to benefit Afghanistan. This is actually just a copy of the billet that was sent out, and you can see at the bottom the proposer was Lord Kitchener, and he was seconded by Brother Sir William Burkitt. The lodge consisted mainly of military officers and senior civil servants, such as the Lieutenant Governor of Bengal, the Archdeacon of Calcutta, the Accountant General of Bengal. The meeting started at 9:30, it took 2.5 hours, so it actually finished, the 3 degrees finished at midnight. And you have to wonder why it started so late, but I think with the brethren in question, it may well be due to the nature of their jobs. And the sign by Amir is now in possession of Freemasons Hall in London. In charge of the visit was actually a Lieutenant Colonel Sir Henry McMahon, who's the Chief Commissioner in India, of which there is actually a lodge number 3262 that was named after him, that initially met in London, but today that lodge now meets in London. And he expressed the feeling towards the British people of the Amir, and I'll just quote a couple of things. So Brother Sir Henry McMahon has said, "I am convinced that his experience of Freemasonry with us played no small part in creating that trust and preserving it unweakened through the years to come. Time after time, missions were sent to Kabul from Turkey and Germany, offering the Amir alluring temptations of territory and power, if he would only take the winning side," as they tried to explain it, the winning side against Britain in this war. Not only did he hold out loyally, but thanks to his firm hand in his country and the border tribes, our northwest Indian frontier enjoyed complete peace throughout the war, so much so that Britain was able to denude India of British and Indian forces and send them to other fields of war, namely against the Germans. The value of this to us was almost incalculable, but as alas was soon proven when, within a few weeks, the end of the Great War, our loyal friend and ally was struck down by the hand of the assassin. The firm hand that kept peace on our frontier was moved. Afghanistan turned against us, and British troops were once again sent rushing back in great strength to India. If this had not been the case, the war might have been much longer. So it's one of these strange accounts that I asked a couple of historians who are my colleagues about this particular aspect, and they knew nothing about this at all. And you just wonder how many real aspects of Masonic history might explain why some things have happened in history, and yet this is an example where very few people seem to know why did the Amir hold out, and it might well just be because of his Masonic affiliations. This photograph is the only one I could find of Lord Kitchener in Royal Arch regalia. This was in the Sudan chapter in 1910. And who would have thought that only 4 years later, he would be made an Earl, and at the outbreak of the war, become Secretary of State for War. This was actually the first time that any soldier had ever held this particular post. When he accepted the post, he was quoted as saying to the country, "You have to perform a task which will need your courage, your energy, and your patience. Remember that the honour of the British Army depends on your individual conduct. It will be your duty not only to set an example of discipline and perfect steadiness under fire, but also to maintain the most friendly relations with those with whom you are helping in this struggle. Do your duty bravely, fear God, and honour the King." Stunning words indeed. This photograph, now if you notice the date, is actually the 7th of June, and it's just a couple of days after the dreadful news about Hampshire, HMS Hampshire sinking. This was Lord Kitchener at Broome Park, which was his home, and he is seen here with a load of injured soldiers who he had invited to come along to his house in Kent, so that they could be entertained for the day, been fed and so on. And they were brought in from various military hospitals. And you think, how many people of that rank today would ever do that with the rank and file of the British Army? And again, I would like to think that this was probably Lord Kitchener and his Masonic principles coming to the fore, where he really did believe and care for the men that were under his charge. Sadly, however, on the 5th of June, HMS Hampshire struck a mine. He was on a visit to Russia. The Prime Minister had posted him to Russia to continue the war effort against Germany. And on the particular night in question, which was horrific conditions, the ship went down with a loss of 737 souls, including Lord Kitchener and his trusted ADC. Now, I know there have been a lot of conspiracy theories surrounding what happened that night, but a book a couple of years ago by, I'm sure his surname was Laws, came to the conclusion that it was just an unfortunate accident, which during that period, many ships were going down with landmines. In December of 1916, just at the end of this year, a new Secretary of State for War had been chosen, and this was the 17th Earl of Derby, who was the Provincial Grand Master of East Lancs, and I'm sure Lord Kitchener would have approved most thoroughly. A number of the papers, obviously, this was main news, and the news, I think, shocked the whole country. And I think in terms of what the British public thought, I don't think there was any ideas of any kind of untoward behaviour. I think it was just they realised that they had lost possibly one of the best Secretary of States. And saying that, a great deal of bad press had gone his way. But looking at the whole thing, I think Lord Kitchener had done a superb job from a military point of view. His aide-de-camp, who was now a Lieutenant Colonel, was one of the few whose bodies were washed up, and he is now buried in Eastbourne. And for some unknown reason, his gravestone, his memorial, was actually designed by none other than Mackintosh from Glasgow. The memorial in Orkney is a very fitting tower, 15 metres high, can be seen from the sea and overlooks where the ship went down. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle had said that the memory of something vast and elemental coming suddenly and going strangely, a mighty spirit, leaving traces in its earthly passage. Again, just shows you the number of people who were shocked by his death. 100 years later, and, well, as you can see the tower on top of the rocks, 100 years later, a full wall was made with all 737 names, and also one particular panel for the members on the mission to Russia. And again, you can see on the left-hand side, you've got Kitchener, you've got Fitzgerald, and the others were part of the team to meet the Russian military to continue the war effort. And it's certainly a very fitting memorial. And this was done 100 years after the actual event. On the left-hand side, we have a procession. This was a king and queen going past St Paul's Cathedral. The king wore full service uniform. The queen wore a dark velvet and black ostrich feathers. All officers had to have swords drawn. Services were held all over Britain, they were held all over Europe where they could do it at that point, and the programme on the right-hand side is a typical programme from Paris, again to commemorate the life of Lord Kitchener. He was immensely popular with his men, albeit he was a stern taskmaster, but most of the good leaders within the military are not pushovers, and the men do respect that. He led his men from the front. He shunned publicity. Despite this, lodges were named after him all over, and these are some of the examples shown. Kitchener Lodge number 3402 was initially in Cairo, now meets in Decalia Garrison in Cyprus to this day. And it's very appropriate, I suppose, that there is a lodge in Cyprus, because this is actually where Kitchener did his first mapping survey in 1878. Kitchener shares the place with everyone else who died in the war, and it's good to see that after his death a grant was made to the medical school at the University of Khartoum, the city which he had subjugated for the empire. With the coming of peace, Kitchener scholarships became available to surviving soldiers who had their education disrupted by the war service. And in fact, in that particular lodge, in the 2998 lodge, bearing his name, two of the brethren were VC holders. This screen shows Lord Kitchener in St Paul's, and this is the memorial. Unfortunately, I think this memorial tends to be closed to the public most of the time. I'm not quite sure why, but I suppose if you do get a chance to see it, it's certainly worth seeing it with two soldiers overlooking the memorial. This is the equestrian statue of Lord Kitchener. It was in Khartoum in the Sudan, but obviously under recent times things change, and I won't mention anything about statues being vandalised these days, but the British realised that with the current regime in the Sudan, I'm not sure when this was moved, possibly after the Second World War, that it probably wouldn't last too long, so it was removed, and today it can now be seen in Kent at Kitchener Barracks in Chatham, home of the Royal Engineers, I believe, which would make sense, which was his initial unit. The other memorial is actually Kitchener Park in Queensland, Australia, and this is where the troop review is conducted every year by the Australian Army. Probably the most well-known memorial is down in Horse Guards in London, and again it's I think a particularly good image of Kitchener, no hat, he's standing there, obviously could be in the middle of an office, could be trying to look through strategies, but it's probably one that he would have approved of. And I think, although the task overwhelmed him, it would probably have overwhelmed any man to conduct the British Army in the First World War. This was a new type of warfare. It saw the introduction of mechanised warfare, chemical weapons, and saw two professional armies pitted against each other. That was a huge, huge task. This particular picture, 1919, was the Kitchener Memorial Homes, and they now come under memorial. I think there's now a charity for the memorial homes, and this was one of the first ones, and this was for ex-servicemen and servicewomen when they come back from the war, if they had no place or if they needed some place to go to be looked after, and a great deal of money had been put into these memorial homes. It's called a holiday home, but it was more of a long-term basis. And today, more recently, we have first aid covers. We've got £2 coins that commemorate Lord Kitchener. So to a certain extent, he hasn't been forgotten. He is still in the public mind. Possibly youngsters today might not know who he was. They might just think he was somebody in the First World War. But I think a lot of my generation and certainly older know exactly who Lord Kitchener was, albeit they probably are not aware of how involved he was with the Masonic craft. Here we have just another couple of lodges that are still operating today. One is in Bolton, Kitchener Lodge 3788, and the second lodge is the one in Cyprus. The photograph here is actually the third Lord Kitchener. Kitchener, that was the first Earl. He had no family, so it went through his brother, and I think the third Earl was a grand nephew and so on. And he accepted honorary membership into Kitchener Lodge 3788, the one with the banner there, and he died only in 2011. The title went to a niece, and this was one of the first times that the title had gone to a female. The Queen had to intervene here to make sure that the title was passed on, because apparently that particular title should only go to male heirs. However, the Queen did intervene, and the title Earl Kitchener still exists today, albeit with a great niece of some sort. Finally, brethren, this is a famous recruiting poster. Obviously, the logo at the bottom wasn't then, but I think we can say quite safely that Lord Kitchener really did do his duty when called upon. He was a very active Mason, and it was clear that he took pride in the craft and took the lessons to his heart. Many people say that we have famous Freemasons, and they just happen to be famous, or they just happen to be a Freemason, and they're famous. Whereas I would say in this particular case, Lord Kitchener was very much a Freemason, and he just happened to be famous because of his military ranks. There's a very nice, just to close, a very nice excerpt from the quarterly communication of the United Grand Lodge of England on the 7th of June, 2 days after his death, 1916. Brethren, we were all taken aback yesterday when the news arrived of the loss of our distinguished brother, Lord Kitchener. We owe him a debt of gratitude which can never be repaid, and we will hold his name in honour from now onwards. Lord Kitchener sleeps in the proudest grave in which he could have been laid, in the sea, surrounded and supported by those who have so nobly upheld the name of Great Britain. Grand Lodge expresses its profound sorrow at the tragic and untimely death of Right Worshipful Brother Field Marshal Earl Kitchener of Khartoum. Brethren, I think we should be very proud to have Brother Lord Kitchener as a fellow brother. Brethren, thank you very much. I hope that was of interest.
Brother Grant Macleod, past master, I think I can say on behalf of all of the brethren, it was of great interest to hear not only about the bits that we probably are all aware of about his exploits as one of our nation's leading military men, but also his connection to our beloved craft. So on behalf of the members of Lodge Hope of Karachi and all our visitors, Grant, thank you very much for all your efforts this evening. And Brian, I'm sure, like me, I'm glad that we persevered through the bandwidth challenges at the beginning. to get to this stage and to hear a very interesting lecture. Grant, as usual, there's always a couple of questions, and there are in here. The first one comes from Brother Michael Monroe over in Paris. You mentioned Macintosh at one point. Are you talking about Rennie Mackintosh?
Yes, Gerald Rennie Mackintosh. Yes. Yep. I don't know why he designed the stone. I don't know what the connection was. But yes, it was Charles Rennie Mackintosh. Yep. Okay.
Out of interest, was he a brother?
I don't think so. No, don't think so. No. Certainly never come across anything in Glasgow records.
Okay.
No,
sorry. Chaz Black's asking, great talk. Did Kitchener ever meet Kipling in the lodge?
I don't know. I've certainly never come across any connection with Kipling. I've had a few. I've done this lecture 3 times, and after each one, I've amended it from things that brethren have mentioned to me. So that's a connection I've never thought of, and you would think with the Kipling connection in India, it probably is probable. So the answer is I don't know, but I will go away and see if I can find anything.
Yeah, I think I could add to that as well. I've been doing a lot about Kipling just now because I'm doing some research into the Victoria Cross in India and the silent cities for the remembrance presentations, and I certainly haven't come across a connection to them. They certainly mixed in the same circles, but I just don't think they were ever together at any one point.
No.
Ian Mackintosh, always a wealth of knowledge. Comes in with Brother George Mitchell Hunter of Lodge Dalhousie, number 679, also went down with HMS Hampshire. He was an engineer serving on board. So again, again, Lodge Dalhousie takes its name from Panmure, who was the instigator behind the Victoria Cross. So connections within connections. Derek Elder, very interesting talk, and I'm sorry I arrived late. It's no problem, Derek, you're here with us. Was it mentioned that Kitchener in Ontario was renamed from Berlin in 1916 to commemorate him?
No, I think Kitchener in Ontario, I think that was from the 1850s, 1860s. It was named. So I don't know if it was the Kitchener family from way before, if Kitcheners had maybe gone out there, but it wasn't named after the first Earl, no.
Okay. Derek's also kindly shared a paper from Yasha Berensoner about Kitchener, and I will put that up on the Facebook later on this evening, Bren, for you to have a look at.
Gordon, Ray Borland from Canada.
Hi, Ray.
Actually, I lived in Kitchener, Ontario for 25 years. It was actually named after Lord Kitchener. It was changed in 1916 as a result of the war. They no longer wanted to have Berlin, and that's why they changed it. It must have gone along with the same time that Kitchener died. I'm pretty sure that was the case.
Oh, thank you, Ray.
Yeah, if it was 1916, that's absolutely right. It's just, this is where you don't rely on Wikipedia. It had mentioned that Kitchener had, in Ontario, had been in existence from the middle of the 19th century. So,
oh, good grief.
Well, I had automatically assumed that it was the name. It might well be the town had existed, but under another name. So that's probably what's happened. It has changed in 1916.
Yes, the area was called Berlin because of the German and Dutch people who came up from the Revolutionary War. They were loyalists, and they came up the Grand River and got up to the Kitchener area and started to settle in there.
Right, well, that's good to know, because I'm now going to add that onto the talk.
Ray, thank you very much. One of the mantras we have here at the Lodge Hope of Karachi is hashtag daily advancement. So Grant, I think that's your little bit of your hashtag daily advancement with that little bit. And again, Brian, it's great to see everyone putting in. Jim Gardner's telling us that Kipling was a member of Lodge Hope and Perseverance 782 in the Punjab. Yep, that's great. Jim, thank you for that. Joe Priest, another one of these military members. So Jim was one of our guest speakers who spoke about St. Pat's, and Joe Priest is a past master of St. Pat's 295 Irish Constitution. And Joe goes on to say, I've had the privilege of visiting Lord Kitchener Lodge number 3402 on many occasions during tours of Cyprus. Lodges banded together to raise funds to rebuild it after it was destroyed by a storm. Joe, thank you very much for that. And I'm sure there was many demijohns of Cockinelli drunk on those occasions, or whiskey sours, or brandy sours, I think. Alistair Marshall, excellent and interesting talk. Well done, Grant. So Brian, there's no further questions in the chat. Just once again, Grant, can I thank you so much for a very interesting presentation on a very interesting man, and I'm sure many of us will maybe not look at Wikipedia as much, but take it with a pinch of salt, what's there. Brian, next week, as I said earlier when we were having the bandwidth problems, we've got Brother Dr. Rowther. He is an English Freemason who has won a few presentations for his lecture work, and he's going to join us and talk about Freemasonry and the American Civil War. And I think we've all heard the stories about brother supporting brother in that war. So I hope that you can join us next week. Brian, as ever, can I thank you for your support of the Lockdown Lecture Series here by the Lodge Hope of Karachi, number 337. Please sign our virtual tile and please look at our YouTube channel. Many of you will know that the History and Heritage Group of the Grand Lodge of Scotland, they've just completed their 10 series lecture on the oldest lodges in Scotland. They're all available on the YouTube channel as well if you want to go back, and we will always keep you informed of what the History and Heritage Group's up to, and I can assure you, Brian, there's some exciting times ahead from them in this virtual Zoom world. Brian, once again, thank you all for your support. Please unmute yourself and say your thank yous to this evening's wonderful speaker, Brother Grant Macleod.
Thanks, Gordon.
Thanks, Grant. Thanks so much.
Excellent.
Excellent.
Excellent. Really enjoyed that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Grant.
Thank you, brethren. Thank you.
That was
Very interesting and informative.
Thanks, Grant.
Yeah, thanks, Grant, for an excellent talk and lecture.
Well received, Grant. Well done.
Thank you very much indeed, Grant. That was excellent. Thank you.
Thanks, David.
Thank you, Grant. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Well worth waiting for.
Yeah, well,
Thanks, Grant, for that very
indeed,
informative
superb
talk.
again.
Goodbye, Grant.
Thank you, Grant. Excellent presentation there. Thanks very much.
Welcome.
Bye, Ronnie Forbes.
Bye.
All right, Ronnie. For big Ronnie to go to his bed.
Just about. Not 10 o'clock, is it?
Aye.
Someplace.
Good night, Ronnie.
You'll have mate then looking for you. No in Perth anyway, Ronnie.
54 here.
Right then, Brian, I'm going to give you 5.
Thanks again, Gordon. Thank you, Grant. Well
Thank
done.
you, Gordon.
Well done, Grant.
Thank you, everybody.
Well done, Grant. Well done,
Well done,
Grant.
Grant. Enjoyed it.
Thank you.
3.
Well done, Grant.
You saved us, Gordon.
Well done, Grant.
Good night, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you, Grant. Good night, everyone.